But I'll just go with that last line there and ask how many of you have worked with or have received funding from angel investors and or venture capitalists? Just raise your hand. None of you. Okay. So in terms of your product development, how have you typically financed what you're doing? Personally? Like most of us. Mm-hmm. Okay. So before I even go there, the purpose of this presentation is if you have an idea that you've developed and you can no longer afford to or personally bootstrap the program, who are you going to be turning to above the typical three F's, as they call it, the friends, family, and fools? You're going to be going out to the angel investment community, the venture capital community. And the reason I'm here is we entered a competition out at Anschutz with our program. And it's really a very good template for what one would anticipate having to provide to the investment community to really take a good look at your program. So a little bit about myself. I have a 40-year, actually plus experience in the healthcare environment. I started out as a paramedic, and that evolved into my becoming a cardiovascular technologist. And at one point I was actually planning to go on to medical school, had an acceptance to CU, looked at the environment of medicine at that time, said I don't really like managed healthcare, I'm too autonomous, I'm too independent. So I ended up developing a company instead that provided mobile medical services to physician offices, surgery centers, and hospitals. And while I was running that company, I actually got approached by a couple of physicians that were developing a new device. Became involved with them, said I really like this product development arena in healthcare. And I've subsequently developed a device in women's healthcare for which I hold a patent because of what I'm here talking about today. That's actually ended up set aside for the time being in lieu of the other program. And I'm currently the CEO for a dental instrument startup company called Sapphire Technology, and I'm the joint inventor. A local dentist here is the lead inventor. So in terms of this particular company, as I sort of described, we're an emergent life science company. We're here in Denver. We've been developing a new line of dental instruments that perform correctly with the modern day composite resin filling materials. And during our development efforts, we have been really quite diligent gathering field data through independent evaluation experience, both locally and nationally. And in terms of our current IP status, as Roger can tell you, because he is my IP attorney, last week we received our issue of notice from the U.S. Patent Office, and we'll actually issue on the 27th of this month. And then where we stand in terms of our commercial efforts, we're finalizing a few little engineering things with a 2015 summer market release on our radar screen. We'll be doing all of our manufacturing here in Colorado, and we'll probably be working with some of the larger distributors throughout the country and internationally to get the product out to market. I have several companies that are very, very motivated, very interested to do what we're try to market and distribute what we've developed. And so, like any company at this stage, we are out there seeking investment capital. At this point, I've actually raised 80% of our initial needs. And one of the reasons I'm here to talk is part of the funding that we received was actually through a competition. So before I go there, I just explain the instrument line to you. Just a little brief thing about it. But you're all familiar with the silver metal and gold metal filling materials. Well, 30 years ago, dentistry came out with the composite resin, the white filling material, and they developed it due to not only concerns about the mercury in the alloy materials, but also to create a more natural looking restoration. And the problem with instruments that are still out there, they work great with the metal alloys, but they don't work well with the resin composites. So we developed a line of instruments that does work correctly with these resin composites, and we're actually using synthetic sapphire for the instrument tip. And the technology issues with the metal instruments that are currently out there, they're very sticky with the composite materials. So just placing the material is very difficult. And if I had more time and I was really just talking about the instrument line, I could actually show you some of the research that we've done to show that current instrumentation actually leads to a bad outcome for dental fillings. So this is what our instrument looks like with the synthetic sapphire tips. On the lower left-hand corner is the flat tip, and on the right side is the domed. And we found that the domed is better for actually creating carving, shaping, actually developing the architecture that you want with the material. And the flat tip is better for actually condensing the material into the tooth. And then that takes us to the competition that we entered, and it was with a development group, or actually an investment group out at the Anschutz Medical Campus. CID4, they stand for the Colorado Institute of Drug, Device, and Diagnostic Development. And as I just said, they are located at Anschutz in the Bioscience Development Park. They're a 501c, not-for-profit organization, and this is pretty much their mission statement: to advance the Colorado bioscience ecosystem through company creation and job growth. They work to identify, fund, and actively manage emerging life science technologies. The same is achieved via an ongoing technology solicitation process, augmented by additional deal flow sourcing through networked relationships. Active due diligence is provided by CAD4 management in consultations with their technical and business advisory. And they offer an annual statewide to early stage life science companies seeking development, capital investment, basically a winner-take-all for a $200,000 investment. And then the prevailing winner will acquire one of their board members, and in essence acquiring both capital and industry management expertise in the process. I'll go through the process here in a second, but I actually I got introduced to CID4's executive director about 4 years ago on a different program that I was working with. And it was probably coming up on about a year ago that I looked at where we were with the development of the dental instrument line and thought, what the heck, I should run it by them, see what their thoughts are. And the executive director looked at what we're doing and he says, hey, I really like this one. It's going to be pretty straightforward for our board to understand, our technical advisory committee. But then he turns around and says, we're in the midst of a solicitation right now. The deadline is in 2 weeks. Are you guys ready? And I go, we'll be ready. And so after the solicitation deadline, and at that point, in terms of being ready, we had to have our business plan and pro forma financials completed. They then whittled that down to 6 companies that present to their technical board and advisory committee, and kind of a interesting side note here is I am partners with a local dentist. And I told him we were going to enter the solicitation with no expectations whatsoever other than a learning experience. I knew some of the early stage companies right there in the bioscience park that I knew were in this competition. I go, we are, if anything, we're going to be the dark horse in this thing. And so we really shouldn't have any expectations other than when this thing is said and done, I can go back to the executive director to find out what could we have done better in our business plan, pro formas, presentations, whatever, when we approach other investment opportunities. So they whittled it down to 6 companies. I presented to their technical board, and quite to our surprise, we were actually one of the 3 companies that CID4 chose to undergo due diligence. And then once the very intensive due diligence phase ended, and it took about 2.5 months of due diligence, and I can tell you just about every other day, I got another whole page of questions, requests for documents, information. It was very, very intense. Then we had to give yet another presentation to CID4's board of directors. Excuse me, I'm kind of recovering from a cold, so if I start losing my voice here. And then once they made the decision that who the winner in their competition would be, then they go into negotiations as to how they're going to structure their investment. For example, equity investment, a convertible that starts out as a loan but converts to equity, or just a straight purchase note, basically a debt instrument. So this past year, our company was the company that won the competition with CID4. And as I say here, we've since structured the terms of our investment with them. We closed the deal back in October, and we've subsequently elected their board member to our board. And the person that they assigned to us, which I think in the long run will be worth even more than the dollars, is somebody that had started a surgical device company. 8 years ago, he sold it to Stryker Medical. At the age of 48, he was very comfortably retired. So somebody who's been there, done it, and the resources that he's already bringing to our program are, you really can't go out there and find those resources easily. And Roger wanted me to, once we closed the deal, there was a press release that went out to well over 500 or 200 reporting agencies entitled CID4 awards funding and management assistance to Sapphire Technology. And then the Denver Post had an article in their business section entitled One Toothsome Deal. And I'll hand this around. So, the other thing too, which I'll do is pass around these 2 instruments. One is a very standard instrument that the dentist uses for fillings, and then one of the other instruments is the clear tip is our Sapphire instrument. So, when we went into due diligence, which is really the heart of what I'm here to talk about, is kind of give all of you some insight into what sort of information you're going to be asked to submit. And I may have this a little backwards, but I'll get to the business plan part of it momentarily. But first, they wanted an executive summary that asked in terms of what our company is and the technology background, and then the short-term and long-term, really what's needed to make this successful. And then I'm going to go into this in much greater length later, but this is very important in the investment community. They use an analysis structure called SWOT, and they really want you to take a good, large, long look at what your strengths, your weaknesses, your obstacles, and your threats are. And that's becoming a very, very crucial component with any investment organizations out there anymore. And I know this is going to not apply to what some of you are doing unless you're doing a healthcare device type environment, but in our case, they asked for any sort of in vitro data, animal studies, safety and toxicology data, any published scientific articles, and other relevant publications as it might pertain to why our technology does what it does and why it's addressing an actual problem versus solving an inconvenience. And then any clinical development plan and any investigator draft brochures. And that all came into play with our independent evaluation experience. Regulatory will obviously come into play in a number of products outside of healthcare. So certainly in a due diligence setting, beware that they're going to want to know that you know what your regulatory environment looks like and your requirements. And then they ask for our management and advisors and pretty detailed information about the management of our company, and then any bios for our directors and advisors. And I can tell you within our advisory, we have 8 separate advisories. And they wanted to understand how we intended to approach manufacturing, what our manufacturing plan was, and our quality systems data. And again, that kind of segues back into some of the regulatory requirements. And then the intellectual property, what's our patent strategy, issued patents, published patents, and in our case, we were also able to provide a registered trademark. And then the actual business development, the development plan, knowing who our market is, what our competition looks like, and our timelines and current milestones and anticipated milestones. And then got into financial and corporate, the pro forma financial statements, our cap table, and budgets and projections. So, and if there are any pre-existing legal agreements that might impact an investment from their organization. In our case, we had no pre-existing agreements. But, you know, those several pages took 2.5 months to really go through and dissect and give them the information that they were looking for to feel that they had completed their aspect of due diligence. So when we developed our business plan, and again, this is really just a highlight, but we start off with a disclaimer, and I really stress this because a number of attorneys have stressed it to me. As much as you can disclaim, and as much as you can have any risk analysis in your business plan, number one, it shows whatever investment community you've really thought through what could happen to your business. I mean, we all look at our innovations and go, boy, this thing could be the greatest thing since sliced bread. On the other hand, if we don't understand what the risks are at market, they'll bite us. So the investors are seriously looking to understand and recognize that we know what our risks are. So just kind of going through these, we had the disclaimer, a management summary, which is really just a highlight of the product, required capital, you know, who are the current equity holders, and kind of some fairly straightforward first few year market projections. And then really got more into the meat of it in terms of the business plan with our clinical overview of what the technology problem is and how we propose to solve it. And then a very detailed section on the target market, looking at market size and opportunity. And again, they're going to look very carefully at what metrics have been used to determine the market size. And I can give you kind of an example of a transactional attorney that I work with who at one point worked with several Major League Baseball players. And he said, yeah, I looked at their projections in terms of their market, And then I looked at the actual numbers, and he said, I looked at these guys, and I didn't care they were Major League Baseball players. I go, there are a lot of zeros here that shouldn't be here. Yeah, it's one thing to think blue sky, but again, you want to keep things realistic. And one of the things that I always look at is the saying, under project, overperform. And a lot of that comes into play as you serially go through further capital investment rounds. Because if you set, well, we'll get into valuation a little bit, but if you set your valuation too high initially, you go out for another round of funding, and you're not worth that initial money, everybody gets diluted. It's called a down round of funding, and you'd rather be on the upside. So we also described what we felt were any competitive devices at market, who our competition is, what we anticipate being our first generation release going to market, the pricing, how we justify the pricing, future product line extension in terms of what can we do to evolve the product line, and how can we scale it to yet a larger market size. And then going into our business model, we included intellectual property, research and development, regulatory considerations, how we anticipate completing our manufacturing, our sales and distribution market pathway, and very important to especially the investment community is your exit strategy. And I can tell you, in terms of angel investment or venture capital, they're going to want to know you've got an exit strategy plan. That's where they anticipate making the money if the deal works for them. And in fact, there was a presenter here, what was it, last June? Who was actually from the Rockies Venture Club, one of the large angel investor groups, and yeah, Paul.
Yeah, he's going to come back.
Oh, good. And it was really insightful, because he told everybody that was at that presentation, he goes, if you are going to approach somebody like me and you don't have that exit strategy, don't approach me. And he actually, he riled up a few people. In fact, I talked to him afterwards and said, I think you either pissed off half the people in the room or scared off the other half. And then he, yeah, I'm sure you have. He laid it out, and
He likes to be blunt, you know, and he teaches that class. He teaches a class in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, he teaches in the graduate school there, and to me it was, I'll tell you actually a great sideline from that one was he presented on a Thursday night, and I was actually going into my first CID4 presentation as one of the 6 companies that they had chosen. And he told everybody in this group, he goes, I wouldn't even come and talk to somebody like me unless you've gone through what they call a boot camp. And a boot camp is where they really help you develop your business plan, skills, developing your pro forma, and your presentations. He goes, on the presentation side, you're going to come out of that boot camp experience, you're going to be okay. He goes, you're going to need to do it a couple of dozen times before you potentially get good. So don't even think about going in front of investment groups before you've been through one of those boot camps. 3 days later, I'm going into the CID4 presentation going, I haven't been through a boot camp. This is going to be a disaster. So I have to tell Paul he's not necessarily correct in that respect. Going back to the business model or business plan, included a section on the management team and the advisory team, how we're going to be represented legally on all different fronts, how we would handle accounting, our timeline projections in terms of getting through development, actually going into pilot production, market release, so on and so forth, what our capital requirements would look like, and again, risk analysis is very, very key. And then just a very brief summary. And then I actually had Roger develop an overview of where we stood at that time in terms of our IP portfolio and our independent evaluation experience. So those were the topics that I covered in our business plan. In our pro forma financials, we have a profit and loss statement. We have our investment requirements, a balance sheet. The details that all flowed into those first three categories. Very detailed pilot production cost, looking at our cash flow summary, and then valuation. And then I was able to provide very detailed market assumptions, based on what dentistry is currently doing in terms of instruments in their practice. And then the market data, what do we think we're going to do that first 5 year? And in that particular section, I opted to go ultra conservative. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've had such good acceptance is the very next section is blue sky, where I can turn around and say, we know if this program takes off, well, we may hit the blue sky numbers. On the other hand, everything that we're basing an investment on is based on our very ultra-conservative market data study. And on the other hand, if this thing hits a home run, that's what the home runs looks like. But we're not basing our valuation on that. We're basing our valuation on the conservative data. And then, going back to, again, what I think is a very important section, and we'll actually get into SWOT as well, is the risk analysis. Number one, we have a limited history, so we don't have a track record. Two, we're very well aware that even though we are introducing something very novel, that doesn't necessarily bar the competition from playing hardball and potentially even just directly infringing us. So we want to just put everything out there, especially for the investor, that we understand what risk they're going to be taking making an investment in us. Market preferences. I can tell you, working with healthcare lasers, that this year's hot great laser is next year's obsolete technology. So things can definitely change from the time that you introduce something to market. Then we detailed out what we thought were business obstacles. Made it clear that we understand any investor the risk of borrowing money from. So, management, for example, what if something happens to any of the major principals in this company? What sort of backup plan do we have, in case something happened to me, my partner, any of our other key management people? Economic conditions, of course, can be a huge risk factor. Imagine trying to take a market or product to market in 2007 and then everything crashed in 2008. And you can't predict these things. But you have to, as a business owner and as somebody trying to propel a program to market, you have to put it out there. You understand and recognize these are risks to the investors. And what I was saying earlier about the competition, proprietary rights and trade secrets, all fine and well when you're playing with honest companies. When you're playing with dishonest companies, you never know what's going to happen out there. What I said earlier about taking ultra-conservative numbers in our projections, I still want to kind of double down on that and say, hey, they're just projections. That we did our best guess estimations coming up with those numbers, what the market might do in terms of purchasing. On the other hand, they are just projections. And to go from risk analysis into the SWOT analysis, which is yet a much more detailed analysis than risk assessment. And again, SWOT stands for the strengths, weaknesses, obstacles, and threats that any company will face. And as I say, it demonstrates a company has completely thought through all the potential factors that could affect their business, good, bad, or otherwise. And I really can't stress this enough, but a SWOT analysis, you should have that completed before you ever approach the angel or venture investment community. If you try to do something like this on the fly, it's not going to look good. They want to feel like you're kind of a good package when you come in. And you can read through these if you'd like, but this is how we presented our SWOT to the investment community. That we identified a true technology problem in dentistry versus a mere inconvenience. And that we established it during the prototype development and in our clinical evaluation experience. We believe it'll prove well positioned, of ultimate high quality, and that the line will fulfill the need for desired improvement to currently existing technology. The expertise of my management team and advisory, that'll set us apart from our competitors. And this is all under our strength setting. We believe our chosen activities and strategies are achievable in light of current economic and legal conditions with the skills background and knowledge of its principals and advisors. At this time, we didn't feel, and we still don't feel, there are any truly competitive instruments at market that are as clinically innovative or advanced. And again, going back to, we're really looking at strengths here. We'll be collaborating with the Director of Dental Materials at one of the dental programs to complete anticipated FDA Class 2 validations. And we were able to actually get a letter from that person to take a CID-4 as to how excited this person is about our technology. And then it really helped to know we already had our manufacturing identified, all of our vendors identified, and especially for CID-4 because they're actually under the auspice of the Colorado Economic Development Council. They're really trying to promote state growth. So it really was very attractive to them that we anticipate doing our manufacturing here in Colorado. And where we stood in terms of developing a distribution network, we actually have a letter of intent with one of the major distributors out there at this point. I think our website is quite good. In fact, I want to thank Jeff because he has been our web designer. And I would highly recommend him if you have any web needs. And again, strengths, we received our notice of allowance for patent back in 2014. But I actually knew when I was presenting the CID-4 that we had allowances at that point, so we knew we were going to get our patent, and we also had the trademark in place. I don't think I need to go over that much more. Okay, and then this is the important part because you can take that strength part and apply it to whatever products that you're developing. But weaknesses seems fairly generic, and in some respects it is. And I would say you could probably use this in any of your investment opportunities as well. Number one, there can be no assurance that we'll be successful in marketing our instrument line or that the revenues will be significant. Consequently, our revenues may vary by quarter and our operating results may experience fluctuations. Again, it seems very simple, straightforward, but again, the investors out there, they want to understand, they want to appreciate this, and you can communicate it to them. Many of our endeavors are capital intensive and may be subject to statutory or regulatory requirements. And I can tell you with healthcare devices, the regulatory side is just gruesome. And I would call that a weakness, and that's okay. And our financial success may be sensitive to adverse changes in general economic conditions here in the United States and elsewhere, such as recession, inflation, unemployment, material and manufacturing costs, and interest rates. Such changing conditions could reduce demand in the marketplace. In certain cases, we may rely on trade secrets to protect intellectual property, proprietary technology, and processes that we've acquired. But there can be no assurances that secrecy obligations will be honored or that others will independently develop similar or superior products or technology. And we've prepared projections regarding our anticipated financial performance. They're hypothetical and based upon a presumed financial performance. They're based on our best estimate of the probable results of operations based on present circumstances. Again, we're just telling them we're doing our best to come up with projections that we feel are realistic, but on the other hand, that could be a weakness in terms of their investment. Again, and sometimes you kind of go back and forth when you're developing this strength versus opportunity, which is which, and you just kind of play around with them. But in this case, I said that the instrumentation that we're developing, since the introduction of the composite resins, and it's now actually close to 30 years ago, we work diligently to develop instrument line that does work correctly with those materials. And we also were able to go back to number 2, demonstrate that the market is really quite substantial once we go to market. I went on to explain that our instrument line will provide clinical benefits not available with current instrumentation. And we really feel that with given proper adoption, we could potentially develop a new standard of care with this instrument line. And then went on to talk about our patent claim allowances, that it actually could lead to techniques in dentistry that our instrument line allows for. And sometimes in your opportunity section, you just kind of hammer and fortify your strengths. And I did mention distribution in our strengths section, and also pretty much reiterated also under opportunities. Same thing with the CU Dental School's Director of Materials. Opportunities outside the U.S., foreign markets. And we'll be exploring yet broader use market opportunities. The composite materials are photo-cured. I know of other areas, actually in medical applications and industrial, where the technology that we're developing within dentistry would actually prove beneficial to those other applications. That's a great opportunity for us. And then threats. There's always the possibility that new competitors could seize upon our business and product model and produce competing products with similar focus. And as I said earlier, going so far to knowingly and deliberately infringe our intellectual property. And there are companies out there, and I've seen these scenarios enough times, that have deep enough pockets. They're willing to risk, if they really see an opportunity, they're willing to risk the triple damages and create the licensing fees, because they know it's a big market, and they know the burden of proving an infringement action is going to rest on us. So you get into a very hardball community at that point. And here you go. New competitors could be better capitalized than we are, which would actually give them a significant advantage. And that competition could capture a significant market share of what we're actually intending to do. Threats, this one here is very similar to kind of the economic fluctuations, but purchasing patterns of customers, competitive pricing, and fluctuation in our material and manufacturing costs, terms on debt service and principal reduction payments, changes in dental filling material technology, and going back to what I said earlier, and weaknesses, general economic conditions potentially influencing our business. And until organizational depth can be established and a succession plan in place, our initial business will be highly dependent on our current management team. This kind of just fairly long-winded, but with any loans that any company has outstanding, the threat that could occur, having a loan called early or a default of that loan, and how that could affect the business. So I'm just going to wrap this up and say that the successful inventor does merge science, economic principles, and law into a cohesive whole. It really is an involved and complex study which takes time, practice, and information to do well. And I really stress that even to my consulting side of my business, where you may have a great idea, but there is so much that is going to go into it, as all of you, I really got a feeling, have already learned quite well in developing your products. And good luck to all of you, because that's what I feel like most of the time. And that's where I will leave it, and leave it open to questions. Thank you.
I had a question, Steve.
No, I'm not answering your question.
How much freedom on the 200,000 do you guys have to spend on whatever? I mean, can you give us a feel for that?
They shot down my request for a Ferrari. I was really disappointed. It's really, and it's going to depend who the investor is. In our case, since they put one of their people on our board, that person's watching
So they
our.
have approval, at least they know.
Right.
But they're not like nitpicking and questioning
No.
every little.
No. In fact, their board person criticized me for being a little too stingy. So he's like, you need to start. He goes, I understand you've been shoestringing this, bootstrapping it.
Yeah.
Now that you've got the money, start spending.
What about, and Don kind of reminded me of this, is the dentist's motivation to improve the quality of the cavity? Obviously the bottom line of the tool is better cavity quality, longer cavity life, less revenue for the dentist, maybe.
Well,
So,
can we turn this off?
could that be an issue? This tool improves quality of the cavity built.
Okay.
So, longer life of the cavity, less patient problems with hospital sensitivity.
Well, to counter that.
I mean, it's a very devil's advocate question.
Oh, absolutely. And it kind of segues into what we have to charge for this instrument market. It's going to be at least 2 to 3 times what current instruments cost. And I've encountered any number of practitioners who've said, what is your instrument cost? And I tell them, they go, oh, that's more than I'm paying for my current instruments. And my response back to them is, let me show you some slides that we developed and tested. Let me show you what your current instruments are leaving you exposed to in terms of about outcome. When a patient develops hot and cold sensitivity after a filling procedure, or comes back a year later, you do x-rays, and now that you've got further decay under the tooth that you just filled last year, you bring that patient in to redo your work. Whose expense is that?
So
Yours.
No charge or reduced charge.
Insurance company won't pay a dime to do a remake. It's all at the practitioner expense. And you also create the potential doubt that you're not a good dentist. God, if I'm having this much trouble with your filling, it reflects badly on the practitioner. even though at this point practitioners are all using the same instrumentation, they're all subject to the same potential bad outcomes. So I think patients whose cavity or filling restorations last a long time without problem probably make the patient more amenable to going in for more regular dental checkups, cleanings. Won't necessarily scare the patient away as much.
So, my hearing is very poor. If I repeat something that you've already said.
Oh, sure.
With this question. So this was an incubator, this CID, do they fund companies and they take a part of the company?
Well, in our case, they did it as a debt instrument. And there's still a chance we may go back to them and say we want to go to a convertible, where in 2 years the debt instrument would convert to equity.
Okay.
They are right there in the heart of the incubator at Anschutz Bioscience Park. And that's why going into this competition, in fact, I knew another company that was, they made it to the final six, or semifinal six. One of my advisory was their COO. And I told my partner, I go, that company is going to kick our butt. And to my surprise, they didn't even make it into the final three.
Wow.
So it really demonstrated to us that.
So that CID would actually let valid, good technology go by the wayside just because they were all.
Well, they can only choose one company.
Wow.
And they chose us for whatever deciding factors, in terms of market feasibility, where we were in our development efforts, what we might be doing to stimulate growth here in the Colorado economic sector. So there were a lot of different variables that they were looking at and making their decision.
Looks like you put a lot of time and effort into this.
Go back to what was the previous slide there? It really is amazing how much time goes into it. Just into this CID4 experience, from start to finish, when we actually signed the investment deal with them, was almost 7.5 months. However, as soon as we signed the deal, I had 2 angel investors on the sidelines that were really following our milestones. As soon as we inked the deal with them, they jumped in.
So they came along also?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Steve, I didn't see in your presentation where you had to outline what you were going to do with the money, and from what you just said, it sounded like they're kind of guiding you once their person's on the board.
In the investment negotiation, we did have to budget where their dollars would be going in terms of development and marketing and regulatory and FDA and all that sort of stuff. No, it wasn't. Unfortunately, again, they kicked the Ferrari out of that one. So no, you can't have that, Steve. What about a Pinto? You can have that. No, we were very detailed in terms of how we anticipated their dollars would be used. But it comes to a point once you get other investment dollars in, now you got this one big pot that you're drawing from. That's really hard to say whose money, is it CID4's money, is it investor A, investor B, whose dollars, at that point. It's really kind of hard to distinguish.
Does the money they gave you, the ICD4, whatever it was, take precedence over any angel investment? Outside angel investments that might come in?
They do have a senior priority.
Do they do?
Yeah.
Is there any collateral backing that?
Nope. Which surprised me, because we have a couple of lines of credit that we do have secured. However, because of their inclusion, we can't even turn to our line of credit without their approval, because they do have senior rights.
How far along the regulatory path
place, we had already worked with several different regulatory affair people. And we had already approached the FDA to find out what our classification was and what our, basically our pathway to market was with the FDA. And so we have a fairly easy market introduction. And there are some other things that we anticipate doing, which become a little bit more regulatory intensive, but we already had, a really solid game plan in terms of how we would be addressing any current and move forward regulatory type considerations. Yeah, I'll tell you, working with the FDA is a lot of fun.
Steve, where does CID4 get their funding?
A lot of it comes from the state.
The state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, CID4 is a quasi-state organization. But I would keep, whatever type of, I know just last week at the CES show in Las Vegas, they had an ongoing, very similar competition going on right there at the CES. I think it was a $50,000 winner take all. And I think they held it right out there in front of the convention center, and they had several companies competing in that. But I'd keep your ears open in your industry-specific niche, because you never know.
Have they asked you to change anything with the product or your business plan that you just weren't about, or?
Well, the business plan is, that's the other thing it's a good question, Jeff, because I always like to emphasize that the business plan is what I consider a fluid document. And, you're going to present something, say this month, 2 months later, your business plan could look entirely different. And the way CID4 structured things with us is they didn't give us all $200,000 out of the gate. They structured in a way where they parcel it out in $4,000, $50,000 increments based on our achieving various milestones. And our next draw from them is actually based on an updated business plan. And they've been the person that they assign to our board is very brand focused. And he's been making incredibly good suggestions in terms of what we might look at in terms of branding opportunities. So, they've been very helpful so far.
Was there anything they suggested that you didn't consider before they suggested it, or was everything kind of like you're already muddling over, like changing in the business plan, and then with them kind of reiterating it, you were like, okay, yeah, let's move forward and make those changes, or was there anything that they suggested that you were just like caught off guard by?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because your business plan and everything was so well laid out. You covered everything.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't imagine what they were going to throw at you that you didn't already look at.
No, and again, it's such a fluid environment where, I talk to the person they assign to our board just about every single day. And, we do all sorts of brainstorming together. And I'd say we've come up with several really great ideas in that collaboration. So that kind of segues back to our business plan. Okay, how do we modify those types of ideas or recommendations, and how do they impact, how do they influence the business plan?
I don't know what the
Who was it that identified the problem? Was that you that saw we've got a problem in the dental industry and we've got a way to figure it out? And who came up with the idea of using sapphire?
Very good story. I was working on medical devices, and I got a phone call about 6 years ago from a friend who had just been to his dentist. And this dentist was starting up kind of a networking group for local services. And my friend recommended, he called me about the group. And so this dentist asks, well, what does Steve do? And he says, well, he actually works to develop new healthcare devices. And the dentist goes, forget the networking group. I need to talk to him about the problem that we have in dentistry. And so I get a call from my friend saying, yeah, this dentist wants to talk to you. And I go, well, I don't know dentistry. I know medical. But I'll sit down and talk to him. If I think I can be beneficial, great. If not, I'll try to find him somebody who has better product development experience in dentistry. And probably within a half hour, I'm looking at the technology problem going, wow, as a layperson, none of us know about this. And what a great opportunity. And then in terms of the actual sapphire, that material actually came into my mind during that first meeting because of our use of it in medical endoscope lenses. And it didn't say any, I told him, I said, I have a material that I think might satisfy. I really don't want to lay it out at this point to bias any ultimate decision. I said, but it's going to be a very strong material in the mix of things that we inevitably look at. And after a year and a half of looking at lots of different materials, it was the material that prevailed.
So did you find people that make sapphire, grow sapphire gemstones? I suppose?
Yeah.
And tell them what you want, size, shape,
Surface finish,
quantity?
you betcha. Maintaining certain manufacturing specs, the whole gamut. Yeah.
How hard was that?
There are several. There are several here in the United States that provide synthetic sapphire. And in fact, the company that we're working with, they're out in San Diego, and what they're developing right now, they've got a lot of, synthetic sapphire has been used in armored vehicles, a lot of military application because of its strength. They're actually building the cockpit windows for the Orion spacecraft. The cockpit windows for the Orion spacecraft
Oh, wow.
will be sapphire.
Awesome.
Yep. And if you kind of look at, Apple has been looking at synthetic sapphire for the iPhone. But I knew of its use in medical applications because of its optical clarity, how robust and strong it was, how well it held up in the autoclave, how well the FDA received it as an approved material. So that's why it came into my mind that first meeting. And I said, yeah, there's something I know we're definitely going to investigate, but we're going to investigate several things. In fact, I hired a secondary consultant with a PhD in materials to just kind of review specifications with me. And at the end of the day, it was still the sapphire that prevailed. Yeah.
Would you call it sapphire technology before this device came around?
Actually, initially, we started out as Sapphire Dental Technologies, and then we simplified it to Sapphire Technology more as a parent company because of other industrial applications that we might have. We could actually end up have subsidiary licensing opportunities. So we decided to make the parent company a little bit more generic, but still describes what we're doing.
You ever plan on bringing all the manufacturing in-house or any part of it, or are you going to do any of it in-house, or are you going to warehouse, or are you going to?
Not immediately. Not immediately. We've got a group up in Boulder that's just a wonderful contract medical manufacturer that I've worked with before. And when I told them I was working on a dental instrument line, they're like, oh, we've been hoping we can find some way to break into the dental space. So they've been a fabulous group to work with so far. And when you start thinking about the regulatory aspects of becoming a healthcare, all the ISO certifications and requirements, I don't think we'll ever bring it in-house. I'm not sure I ever really see a distinct advantage unless we were going to look at this as a 20-year program. We're looking at it as try to get out there, establish market share, get one of the big companies to acquire us.
See
Let them.
your slide you're flipping.
Oh, you know, how do you turn this off? You know, it's that damn pocket thing. How do you turn that off, Roger?
Oh, yeah.
Because that way I can actually walk over here and not get.
You've done market research and you know what the potential market is. Resources today, figure it out.
Yeah, if you want to take time to do the research, the numbers are up, and you can really come up with pretty good and reasonable feasibility.
And you say, one of the members of CID is gonna be on your board of directors. How many people are on your board of directors?
At this point, there's four, and we're gonna actually probably say five.
And is there, equity dilutable? Can they be diluted, if somebody brought in $5 million, wanted to invest, could their equity be diluted?
Potentially, but I don't know if that's worth it. And we advertise as well, so it comes to our current membership, that we really don't want to see anybody get diluted. Now, the way dilution could occur is if we were projected our valuation, and we bring in the research and the funding, but we're really not at the valuation of that would dilute all of us at that point. But we're not actively
It's
going to
not
pursue.
in the game plan right now, right? Just curious.
That's a good question, because that question came up a number of times with those that were coming up with us. So we allow for it in our operating agreement, but on the other hand, we don't really want to see that happen. We can avoid it.
Unreal. When did you get the first idea? How long ago was that?
Oh boy, I think I had my first meeting with the dentist just about 6 years ago.
It just takes time.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is he'll be the first one to say, God, I can't believe how long this is taking and how much it's costing. I go, well, we're actually ahead of the curve. I think most programs in the healthcare related device, I would expect where we sort it and filter it, you know, really just a simple pass-through of the crystal material.
I get it.
So you see, when that composite cures, it goes through a chemical change, and I think, doesn't it shrink like 2%?
Anywhere from 2 to 8%.
So it shrinks, so when you keep compressing pressure on it, you make sure that shrinkage doesn't result in a cold shut or gap compared to the material already in it. A lot of tube films end up with some amounts of porosity. They had some excellent pictures of they took extracted teeth and filled them, and then cut them in two, and then put, was that machinist dye you put in?
Like a new
Just,
thing, yeah.
yeah, and then the angle flow and all the cracks and lines and openings. So it was noticeable improvement with this method. In a homogeneous material, a good bond between the parent tooth and the composite fluid.
Give you an idea of, this would be, let's see, illustrated instrument. And you can see this is the composite material, the tooth is there. This is the black and the ink, and real lithographic. So anywhere along the margin, that's what we call the leakage. And that's bacteria, and you can still be getting into process radiations, further decay.
No, is that the tooth and that the composite?
Composites are your native tooth materials.
So this is the tooth there? Oh, my God.
And then you look at this one, the same sort of, black one, this one looking.
And that's your wood?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're told.
No, this is wood. This,
Okay.
okay. So, this is
Oh, my God. Huh. Oh, yeah.
that's the wood. And you see
Yes,
no
no.
whatsoever. Okay.
Good job.
That's the clinical advantage that we bring to this.
Is this just one tool, or is it a line of tools? that
It's a
use this
line,
technology?
it's a whole line. It's a layering technique at this point where you build it up 1 to 2 millimeters, depending on how deep the cavity.
So again, it's gonna be 5, 15 different tools using this.
We anticipate somewhere in the range of 60 to 20 tools. And because when you get to your very last layer, that's considered your, what they call a quizzle anatomy. And that's where you have your ridges, your crosscuts, will have tools specifically to create that anatomy. And they'll be different sizes depending on how much architecture you want to create with it. So yeah, it's going to be a complete line of instruments really anticipating to handle any type of preparation that a dentist would encounter.
Once they buy a set, they won't ever need to buy another set, or they wear out.
We think it's going to be quite durable. And we're designing that way because of the premium price that we charge for it.
How expensive is it compared to old school?
This is about anywhere from $40 to $80 depending on the kind of coating. And that's, it was interesting, when I first sat down with this dentist, I said, okay, what is, you guys have been working with this composite material for 25 years. So he goes, number one, I cringe every single day, knowing that's what practitioners are doing to make metal instruments work, make their job easier. He goes, given how many different composites there are, how many different wetting solutions, the chemistries, the interactions between really the unknowns of what's being combined, how is that changing the chemistry, the integrity of the composite? What sort of voids is it creating within the material? He goes, the fact that you're eliminating that, huge.
Excellent. So
Mhm.
you can charge $400-500 a unit.
So we're looking at 135. I mean, you know, in the overall scheme of things, it's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean,
If you get the kind of results you're getting.
well, and again, if they don't have to see a couple dozen patients come back every year with sensitivity issues or re-decay
Right.
because of bad instrumentation, it more than makes up the cost of having good instruments. So I know our early adoption base, it's there already. I talk to dentists all the time that go, oh my God, you're developing a better instrument. And when I tell them, or I'll get the response, oh my God, we hear from the reps all the time that they have a better composite instrument. Well, it's just a different coating. You guys,
So this is
you're
totally different ballpark.
a totally different approach to it.
Nice. Good job.
Thank you.
I'll get your card.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Your company's still looking for new, you're still always looking for new companies, that's what your company does, or is that now just this down to?
Me personally,
Yeah,
I still do a little bit of consulting work. You know, more of the business development side of it. You know, whatever resources that I can possibly bring to the table that might help somebody in a development mode. Mhm.
We take a quick break and then reconvene and open it up for general questions. And the restrooms are through the exit to the left. Yeah. All right, we have that. Okay. To see my dentist.
Are you?
So if I understand that the invention is related
You're
to
welcome.
the material that is considered then there is still the curing light that is used as usual, right, for the curing of the finish.
Right.
Yeah.
But the upside here is they'll condense the material in the tube,
Right.
then they have to remove it.
Right. Press the compressing.
But when they take it out,
Then lifting the right.
with this,
Yeah, I mean, it's just that.
they don't remove it. So it completely eliminates that opportunity to pull that. Once you've cured the material, well, whatever pullback you created, you've just cured it that way. Right.
Wow. So I'll
Did I give you one of my
the
cards?
dentist open to this new set of tools?
Oh, I can't wait to get to market.
Oh, okay. So it's not in the market.
No,
stage.
no, we're still probably about 6 months from marketing. But I can tell you, I worked with a number of independent evaluators who were so skeptical. Well, it's like, oh God, yet another.
Oh, sure. There's some dentists that, we
gonna cost this
It's a
much.
tradition, we always sit down with this tool, and everything is fine. Oh, sure, sure.
I love those people. I just love them because it's like, don't listen to me. Use it. Then tell me what you think of it. And if it doesn't give you opportunity, then don't buy it. But if you see the opportunity in it, I'm not a, I'm really not a salesperson. I would rather have the product sell itself. And based on improvement, based on merit. And this is one of those that I look at. The distributor that we're under a letter of intent with, I'm going to be working with their territory managers. Say, hey, when you encounter those, don't try to hard sell them.
Specifically oriented with
You know,
composite material.